You know, one of the things that Larry mentions to me almost every time we talk is that kid in the video who played the cello 3 years ago that was so moving and so touching to him. So I thought I'd start by giving Larry an update on the kid. So I'm not going to play that video. Actually, I brought a different kid because I know Larry would be disappointed if I give a presentation at this meeting and didn't bring a kid making music. But anyway, the kid in this video, I'm not quite connected here yet. His name is Michael Chen. He's now 22 years old. He's in a collaborative program at Juilliard in Columbia. Really interesting child. And anyway, just a fascinating thing. If you ever want to look him up, he's a wonderful, wonderful player and a great thinker. But my talk isn't about that. What all of the little etudes we've been saying today and yesterday have been intended to do is to illustrate some features of the way that we think that may not be immediately present in our thinking. And as spending all of my life in school, I was a student and I loved school so much I decided never to leave school, and I'm almost 60 and I'm still in school. It's interesting to me of the idea that my role is to change other people. I mean, that's a pretty arrogant, audacious way to think. And I think many people who are interested in improving the healthcare system in the United States have the same goal, right? I mean, what was interesting to me about Ken's talk earlier is, you know, giving all this information to doctors about their patients and their preferences and those kind of things had no effect on the way the doctors actually interacted with their patients and what actually happened to them. And one of the things that's striking to me about that is how much we who imagine ourselves as thinkers are confident in the fact that the way to get other people to change the way they think is to talk to them and to tell them things. And as I said, only partly in jest yesterday morning, again, we're so confident about this procedure that we build institutions with rooms like this, with the idea that you will learn something because I ostensibly know something that you don't know, and now I'm going to tell it to you, and then you'll know it. Well, that's demonstrably not the case in almost all circumstances. But I'm going to start with the kid, not only because the kid is cute, but also because this illustrates something interesting about what I'm going to talk about. So here's the thing, if I can make this go. Now, if you're not touched by that, you have no soul. I would tell you though something's interesting. You're all clapping. That kid's not here. You know, he can't hear that. I'll tell you a little bit about this kid. I thought many of you might have seen this. He has now 63 million hits. This video has been seen on YouTube. He's from Japan, lives in Tokyo. And at the time this was made, he was 5 years old. And the way he learned to play the ukulele is Japanese television had announced that they were going to broadcast a number of beginning ukulele lessons on television. So his dad went out and bought 2 ukuleles, one for himself and one for his son, and together they learned to play the ukulele, and this is the result. I have to tell you how I found out about this video, though. One of my doctoral students sent me this link to it and said, you got to see this video. Somebody locked a kid in a closet with a ukulele. It looks like he's in a closet, doesn't it? It does. But I have to say, being an expert musician myself, if I were to adjudicate this performance, I would find many flaws. His strings don't always vibrate with a clear tone. He sort of loses time when he scratches his nose. He doesn't know any of the words. He's Japanese. He's just making sounds that sound like English. There's a lot wrong with that. But I would argue with anyone to exhaustion that that kid didn't understand what music is for, right? That he learned all the important things about music. And the core of what music is present in that. Even though it's flawed. And there are things to be fixed and things to be modified and refined over time. Now, that's an interesting way to learn. And I want to suggest to you that it's the way that most of us learn almost everything we learn outside of a formal setting, right? When little babies learn to ambulate, when we learn to use language, when we actually even try to teach people things outside of school. We think about something like baseball. And many of us who were little kids in the country who learned to play baseball know that we didn't start playing baseball. We started playing something called t-ball because they know that we wanted to play baseball, but they know it's very hard to hit a moving target with a stick. So they took away the hardest thing, which is hitting a moving target with a stick. So they put the ball on a stationary platform at the height of an excellent swing, right? But the goals, everything else about the goals of what I'm doing, just like baseball, right? My goal is to hit the ball away from where fielders are, run like hell to first base before somebody can get the ball and throw me out, right? So right at the beginning, I'm playing baseball. They've just taken away the hardest thing. And as we develop skills, the thing that happens next, right, is coach pitch. Because now that I've gotten pretty good at hitting that thing where I want it to go, now I'm going to practice hitting a moving target. But because an adult can get a ball over the plate at about the same place every time, I'm hitting a predictable moving target. But I'm still playing baseball. And as I get better at that, now some kids have been learning how to throw. And now there's some kids throwing at me now. And their goal is to trick me into thinking the ball's going someplace that it actually doesn't go. So right from the beginning of my experience, I'm playing baseball. Now, one important thing about that's very much like this kid playing the ukulele, right? He didn't start out with lessons on music theory and chords and acoustics and practice air strumming before he got a ukulele. He started by playing with the ukulele. And one of the lessons to take away from this, which I think is very much a part of everything that we're trying to do here, is to get out of the notion that seems to be true from inside of our own consciousness, which is that we experience the world around us, information comes in, we process it, we make a decision, and we act. That's almost never the case. Kahneman's book alludes to this. Scott alluded to this a little bit earlier. But the point of all this is, right, is that our thinking generally teaches us, wrongly, I think, that we change the way we think, and then that change in thinking will change the way we act. And it's almost always the reverse. And one of the best examples I can think about is to think about our emotions. Think about a time when you're sad and telling yourself, well, stop being sad. Let me enumerate all the reasons I shouldn't be sad. That seldom ameliorates sadness, right? And likewise, many of the things that we want to be able to do that we're not able to do are not fixable, are not changeable just by providing information. And I think we have many examples over the past 2 days of that fact, right? In an effort to do something positive for other human beings, our thought was, let's increase the information. And as David pointed out in that beautiful talk he gave yesterday, right, is having more data doesn't necessarily make you make better decisions, right? Not if you don't have the right algorithm. But there's another issue besides the algorithm, and that is that we are emotional beings. And as I hope we illustrated with the Monty Hall problem and the other things that we looked at over the past couple of days, is that there are emotions tied to the ideas that we have that affect our behavior and our thinking and our feeling. And those things cannot be ignored. We ignore them at our peril. Again, whether we're talking about individuals making healthcare decisions or families making healthcare decisions or institutions or healthcare providers or a government. Right? We can't just assume that once we give people the information, they will then incorporate that information into their decision-making and act accordingly. So I have a couple things to think about. The first, I'm sorry I'm going to play this again, but I love this little video. For those of you who work in Division I universities, you know we all have sports teams that we like to tout how cool our institution is, and we have little clips that we play when our sports teams are on television to say how cool it is to be our school. And this is one that we used to play back in the 90s at Texas. I pulled it off the web because it's so great, and you can probably tell from my voice I'm not from Texas, but I've grown to love the audacity of the place. And this video expresses that audacity.
We don't claim to be able to change the world. We just change people. And then they change the world. We're Texas.
Now, come on, who don't want to go to school there, right? I mean, we got Walter Cronkite's voice, we got steel guitar, we got breakfast tacos, it's fantastic. Now, again, I love the audacity of that, and the idea that well, we just change people. You know, they come to university, we just change them. You know, and whenever I would find myself at some social gathering with the then president and then provost we were playing this, I'd say, you know that ad we got on TV right now says we just change people? How do we know that? And of course, there was long silence after that. And even more than that, how do we know we're changing them the way we're intending to change them, right? And much of that has to do with basing our decision-making on what we do to and for and with the people we're trying to influence, right? But what ukulele playing illustrates and t-ball illustrates is you don't talk somebody into changes in behavior. You do somebody into changes in behavior. And those changes in behavior inevitably lead to changes in thinking. Now again, that's a backwards thing from the way most of us have learned to think because it doesn't feel like that from inside of our own consciousness. And that's a transition that has to be made if we're going to successfully affect the kinds of decision makers that we want to affect. I feel so privileged because I can't believe I have the same slides on my presentation that Joy Hirsch had on hers. I feel like, I mean, come on. I mean, I got a brain and I got a connectome. It's just what a coincidence. So, you know, this is what we're thinking about, right? We're thinking about affecting this thing. And the idea that we typically imagine is that information goes into a brain, it gets encoded, it gets stored, and then in the future it will be advantageously retrievable in a way that we can use it effectively. And one of the comments I made 3 years ago was, you know, medical school education for a long time, imagine the idea that you're going to jam a bunch of information into people's heads, and then later, years later, they'll be on rounds, some patient will present with a particular combination of symptoms, they're going to go get their virology lessons out of there, pull it out, use it effectively to do that. Brains just don't work like that, right? And the reason they don't is because thinking is a practiced behavior, right? And when we stop thinking about this as a file cabinet or a folder or a hard drive, and imagine that what happens when we change the thinking of human beings and we change the behavior of human beings, organic brains have to actually grow new stuff. So you got to ask the question, what would motivate an organic brain to expend the biological energy to change? And the quick answer is not what you're doing right now. And one of the things I will invite you to think about, not to depress you, is just in a quiet moment, maybe in the bathroom later, when you're at home, try to recall everything you can about the past 2 days of talks. And be amazed at how little you can remember. And again, it's understandable that you wouldn't, right? Because there would be no obvious advantage for you to remember all of that stuff because you've not worked at it. You've not put any effort into doing anything to create memories. And brains are very efficient. And another word for efficient is lazy, right? So there's no reason to do something if you don't have a reason to do it. And one of the things that we have to do if we're going to change the way people think and behave is we have to not only give them reasons to do it, but opportunities to practice doing it. Because, as Joy already showed you, the cool thing about brains isn't the fact that stuff is in different compartments and different segments and different modules, is that all that stuff is connected in some way. And each time we experience something, each time we recall a memory, each time we experience something that we think is for the first time, right, what our brains are doing are looking for connections between those experiences and stuff that's already in there. But the thing about learning anything new is that there's stuff already in there. Now, we would imagine often when we're going to present something that someone is unfamiliar with, that now I'm showing them something for the first time, they don't know about this, and it will be sort of put in this blank space in their brain. There are no blank spaces in your brain. Right? What your brains are trying to do is relate what you're experiencing now to stuff that's already in there. And that stuff that's already in there is coloring what you're experiencing right now. I mean, all of you, I'm sure, know that everyone in this room is experiencing this moment differently from the person sitting next to you. Not only because you have a different auditory perspective and a different visual perspective, but because you have a different history recorded in your brain. And what I'm doing right now and what I'm saying right now is affecting those memories different ways, because all of you have different memories. Not only that, after this is over, when you leave this room, what happens to you subsequent to leaving this room will color what you remember about this experience and about this conference, right? So memory is a tremendously dynamic, changing thing. I try to look when I'm helping my students try to think more effectively about other human beings, is to boil things down to what I think is simple, in David's effort to make things look easy, but not overly simple. Not, it should be simple, but no more than it needs to be. So this is a good way to think about what happens if people are going to do anything, right? They have to know what they're supposed to do, what they want to do, right? They have to be able to actually do it, and they have to want to do it. Now, I asked you to consider for just a moment, in any intervention in healthcare, which of those three things, and in what proportion, does that intervention address the individual, right? Now, again, I would say, in my own naive empiricism, I don't have actual data on this, that most of the interventions address the no part, right? We're going to tell you stuff and explain stuff to you and show you the consequences and how can you allow this to happen, right? But there are other factors that are influencing whether someone actually makes a change in their behavior or a change in their thinking. Some of it has to do with capacity to actually make that change. And I'm speaking about intellectual capacity, physical capacity, opportunities in the environment, whatever that happens to be. And they also have to have some desire to do it. And just creating one of those things without the other two is a losing proposition, right? All three of those things have to be addressed. And I appreciate the elegance of that conception of what we do and how we do it. 3 years ago, when I was giving this talk, one of the phrases I came up with in developing a talk that I love is this phrase. And it's got a lot of press. I've got a lot of mileage out of this phrase. That if I intend for you to learn something, right, one of my goals is to create strategic confusions in your thinking, right? My goal isn't just to show you stuff, because the confusion creates dissonance in your head that your brain tries to resolve. Right? Now, the interesting thing is, and I said this last time I talked here, as a teacher, that's a difficult thing to do sometimes, because I became a teacher because I love to help people understand things. And I'm so reinforced by that if you look at me and you seem confused, my first instinct is to go unconfuse you. And I'm reinforced by that because you're so happy to now be unconfused, and you're grateful to me for unconfusing you. The only problem is you didn't learn anything. Right? School is full of this. So the question is, how do we then, in a healthcare system, first of all, create strategic confusions where, if we're trying to teach a family to make intelligent healthcare decisions, how can we create things that actually get them to do something that produces potential error that they can then correct? Now, I went by that really fast, so I'm going to say it again. And I felt like I needed to come up with a phrase for this meeting, too, so I came up with this one. Optimal dissonance. I'm a musician, so I think about dissonance a lot, right? But one of the things that makes strategic confusions effective is that the level of dissonance that they create in a learner is manageable by the learner. It's uncomfortable. I want to resolve this. I'm not sure what to do, but it's within my reach, right? It's in my capacity. And not only my intellectual capacity, but my level of patience and my level of endurance and whatever else we're talking about. A thing that has to happen in this producing part is that typically what we do when we set up learning experiences, whether, again, it's a healthcare provider talking to a patient, or whether it's a public dissemination of information about diet or whatever it happens to be, what we tend to do is we tend to spend a lot of time telling people stuff and preparing people to do stuff before we actually ask them to do something where they potentially create errors. Now, this is a huge deal. And I have a proposition about this that is a conjecture that may be completely unfounded, but I'm very fond of it right now, so I'm going to believe it for a moment. And it's this, right? That as time moves on, the longer I spend telling you stuff and getting you ready to do stuff and preparing you to do stuff before I actually let you try, the greater your aversion to making mistakes is going to be. I'll say that again. Right? The longer I tend setting you up to do something and preparing you and explaining to you and getting you ready to begin to start to do something, if I wait, the longer I wait, the more consequential you're going to perceive error making on your part to be. And that's a huge deal, right? I mean, when we taught our children to ride bicycles, right, if we didn't use training wheels, we just put them on a bicycle. We didn't talk about balance and center of gravity. Right? Put them on a bike, you hold the seat, right, and you walk along, and they're fooling around, right? So that kind of mistake making, and again, I'm thinking about mistakes much more broadly than, picking the wrong thing or making getting the math problem wrong. I'm thinking about mistakes as a difference between my expectations and intentions and the reality of my experience. So that's an error that I'm now motivated to resolve, right? That I wouldn't be if I didn't generate that error on my own. Now, that's only the first part, strategically setting up the opportunities for error making. The other thing is providing opportunities for the learner to correct her own error. And one of my favorite stories I like about this, I have a doctoral student who finished 2 years ago, and one of her things she did for assistantship was she taught a class piano, a bunch of lecturers on pianos, and many of the athletes on our campus, many of the football team, took her class. She's become very famous as a great piano teacher. So she's a little woman, North Carolina. She teaches at a university in Ohio now. And there's a video of her working with this student, this big guy. So when he was sitting in his chair and she was standing next to him, their eyes met, And he's trying to work out this thing. And he's very frustrated. And he looks up at her and says, if you were a good teacher, you'd show me how to do this. And my very astute student said, you're probably right. But because I'm an excellent teacher, I'm going to wait a few more minutes while you figure it out. Now, I have to say, she said that with the informed confidence that he actually could figure it out, right? I mean, were she not confident and she just let him, flounder around, that would just be mean-spirited. But she knew he could figure it out and allowed him to figure it out. And that created a different kind of experience that changes thinking and behavior in a way that my helping you in a way that explains it for you and does it for you simply cannot do. So the thing you have to ask about for different learners, though, is what's the optimal dissonance, right? How much do I explain before I let you start fooling around and making mistakes? And my only broad brush answer to that is way sooner than we typically do. This pertains to school. It pertains to learning really anything about anything, right? Is not feeling like that we're trying to do is give so much explanation that I'm going to preempt error. Because the error is part of the thing that motivates a brain to actually expend the energy to change. So I have one little visual metaphor to leave you with to sort of think about this, and it has to do with training wheels. I don't know if you can tell in these two pictures, but these training wheels are set up wrong. And the reason is all three wheels are on the ground at the same time. This young girl can't learn anything about riding a bicycle on that bicycle. Why? Because there's no error. Because no matter what she does with her body, the bicycle is going to remain perfectly upright because all three wheels are on the ground. Right? Now you look at this bicycle over here, these training wheels are set correctly because this kid's leaning over this way a little bit, that wheel's on the ground, that one's in the air. Now what does that do? That means that as this kid rides along, as he shifts the weight of his body, the bicycle responds. He makes errors. But they can't be catastrophic errors because there's a training wheel there to stop him before he falls over. Now, I think that's a beautiful way to think about setting up learning experiences, right? Is strategically, first of all, creating confusion, and then optimally selecting the level of dissonance so that a learner can actually go through an experience in a way that they see the consequences of their various actions and actually can make course corrections on their own. Is this hard to do? It is like really hard to do. It's really hard to do. But it's not impossible to do. But it requires a very different way of thinking about the way we think. And I think Kahneman's book, as Scott was saying, very much kind of points us in that direction, but I think it's a very interesting thing to consider all of the places where this is an opportunity to actually do something positive, not only in healthcare, but in all of the places we find ourselves working with other human beings. So, on behalf of all of us, thanks a lot, and I wish you the best. Larry, thanks for having us.